I stumbled across the worst gaming take I think I've ever seen. So I sat down, put the Kendrick Drake beef on a loop, and I got to work. I believe the argument about the killing of masculinity in video games presented by Andy Pants Gaming is an objectively bad take for gaming. And I'm going to give plenty of examples as to why I think this is. Normally, I wouldn't have went right to making a video talking about how I think another YouTuber is wrong like this, but Andy's channel seemed relatively new like mine at the posting of this video, which kind of like leveled the playing field to me in my head some kind of way, made me feel more comfortable making a video like this. And the fact that his video absolutely blew up. At 1.7 million views at the time of filming this and counting, it really seems like he hit on a popular feeling. So I feel like having something that contains the counter argument should exist alongside of it. So to begin, we're going to look at Andy Pants' argument. I'm going to impartially summarize what his video is trying to say, and we'll wait to add my opinions on those things until afterwards. And I'll be clear about when this shift happens. His video starts with the assertion that there's an issue in modern gaming, that games aren't made to the same degree of quality as games from the past, particularly games from the early 2000s, which was an era that produced some of my favorite games as well. So far, we do agree with this initial premise. Andy then asserts that the root of all the issues we've been feeling in video games are caused by the studios that make these games becoming more feminine in recent years, as compared to the past.
I was looking at recent staff photos of Ubisoft and Halo Infinite developers, and it's all starting to make sense. It's a bunch of fat, white, liberal women. And white, liberal women have no interest in masculine, manly, male characters. They wouldn't even know how to write one if they tried.
His proof of this is provided in pictures he displays of Ubisoft employees where it appears the entire group is female. He opposes this with a picture of Rockstar developers that depicts an all-male workforce. He says this is the reason why Red Dead Redemption 2 was a manly, well-performing game. The thought process here is that all the games we grew up with were more masculine in nature. They were mostly war games and shooters like Call of Duty, Medal of Honor, Halo, and Gears of War. And that the teams creating these more masculine games were made by men for men, resulting in better quality games. And he feels that now in the modern era, where more women and LGBTQ employees exist within the gaming industry, this has led to the stories and characters within the industry to decline in quality and appeal. This is Andy's whole video. From building out this initial position, he then provides some examples of what he's talking about and explains how these examples prove the point he's ultimately trying to make. He includes the previously mentioned photos of Ubisoft developers and 343 developers as proof that women have taken over the industry. In the next section of the video, he puts a character from Apex Legends on the screen as an example of a homosexual character, while explaining this is why he doesn't enjoy more modern games. He openly wonders,
what happened to a masculine dude with a hot chick on his arm?
Oh, and there's gonna be more on that Duke Nukem reference later, I promise. And he shows tiers of Game Pass and the multiple game covers on the screen as he describes being sick of seeing cutesy art styles. And those were just a few of the early examples he uses to make this argument. In a bit, we're gonna go point by point and talk about the examples Andy puts on screen as he continues to give his argument. But first we have to start with this initial premise that's set up right in the beginning of the video. Because I want to be clear, no matter the opinion you formed based off what I've explained and shown to you so far, I haven't been putting a spin on it. I haven't started attempting to counter anything yet. I've merely summarized the point of the whole video, and in a way in which I think is fair based on what he says throughout the whole thing. And I want to address why I think he and so many of his viewers feel that this is the obvious truth behind what has been happening to the gaming industry in recent years. Because yes, I agree that there are general differences between games of the past and games released today. And I think it's more common to be let down by new releases than it was a decade or two ago. This is a common feeling amongst gamers. There are countless of other videos discussing why people think this is. But I seriously do not agree with Andy's reason why gaming feels different now. I mean, I kind of get it. Like, at an assumption level, there probably weren't as many women working in the games industry in the early 2000s. It's probably something that has had a measurable change in the last 2 decades. But blaming every problem that you perceive within the industry to be caused by this one change, especially without solid evidence, is pretty silly and generally sexist. Even in the good old days Andy talks about, you can find women in prominent video game development roles. I took a look around and found that the script and dialogue writer for Gears of War, one of the more manly games Andy talks about from the past, was a woman named Susan O'Connor. And no, I don't want to devolve into a back and forth of just how many women worked on these older games, or really have a discussion on whether women are qualified to work on video games, because of course they are. This fact shouldn't even be a conversation. One quick example of this being that my favorite young teen novels that detail the teen boy experience were written by a woman. Having this discussion in 2024 feels pretty absurd, but after watching this video, it needed to be said. And look, I don't want to offend Andy or anyone that has resonated with his video. My goal here is to open a discussion about this topic and provide some actual evidence while proving how these assertions are incorrect and talk about what's really killing masculinity in video games. So now, to go point by point through at least part of Andy's video, we have to start with the beginning, where Andy provided images of development teams at Ubisoft and 343 Industries to portray them as entirely female, thus being his reasoning why these games are just so bad now. There are a few things wrong with what's going on here. First, these are obviously images of all the company's women developers gathered together for something like International Women's Day, like a photo op or something. Looking at the way Andy presents this, it really does look as though he's saying that there are just no men employed within these studios, which is incredibly false. So we're already off to a shaky start when it comes to the quality of evidence Andy's presenting for his argument. But let's keep going. Andy then jumps right in and claims, quote, "Everything is just so gay now." But one, what does that even mean? He puts a random character on the screen from Apex Legends as if we all would know that this guy is homosexual just by looking at him and him being on the screen. He says that almost every character in newer games is either gay or transsexual. But if his example on screen is what he's talking about, then this sounds like more of a him problem than a problem with the developer or the entire gaming industry. He could look at this character and just not assume it was created out of some sort of agenda. And like, to be honest, so what if some characters are made with the express intent to be homosexual? Gay and transgender people exist in real life, whether you approve of them or not. So why shouldn't they be included in video games as well? Don't we want games to be as realistic and representative of our world as possible? Because as much as you complain and pick out instances of homosexuality in video games, heterosexual relationships and literally every other US cultural norm is still way more often represented in all media, including video games. And moving straight out of this Apex example, we immediately see Andy ask where all the masculine characters with a quote, hot chick on his arm went. While he says this, he tosses up a picture of Duke Nukem from the notably horrible Duke Nukem Forever. A review of this game from Gaming Bolt literally says, quote, Duke Nukem Forever is a horrible, horrible game. One that might rank as one of the worst games ever created. If you value your money, your time, and perhaps most of all, your intelligence, just stay away from this game and run in the opposite direction as fast as you can when you're offered to play it, end quote. Like, dude, how are you going to show this dog shit game in any capacity when discussing how games with more masculine values are supposedly objectively better than anything made in the modern day? Combining these thoughts and images together like this seriously gives the impression that you're saying, remember how badass Duke Nukem Forever was? Where did all the classics like this go? Where's all of my masculinity? Where'd it go? Why did you kill it? Like, and I get Andy's probably means the cooler, better accepted iterations of Duke Nukem when he says this, but he uses this specific image multiple times throughout the video. Like, look at how he presents it this time.
You will see sales go through the roof. Go through the roof.
How am I not supposed to think that all he wants are more games like Duke Nukem Forever? But from here, Andy spends some time giving viewers the example of the Saints Row reboot, displaying the main cast on screen while explaining that all of the gay characters in the bad story are due to the way that LGBTQ employees at Volition, the studio that created the game, had bullied their way into leadership positions and imposed their will on all of the creative decisions within the game. He presents this as the reason why the game failed and why the studio was later shut down. His proof of this was an inside source at the studio who spoke out about the way these things went down before the closure. So I couldn't find anything on this supposed Volition insider, at least not from any source that seemed trustworthy, and I didn't even really find it in a Google search, period. But I did find still seems to put these claims mostly to rest. I found multiple sources that directly cite a massive $2 billion dropped deal between Volition's parent company, the Embracer Group, and Savvy Games Group, as the reason Volition was ultimately shut down. This deal falling through caused Embracer to have to restructure, as they had spent the last few years acquiring multiple studios, which got pretty expensive, which means people lost their jobs. And not like studio closures and layoffs are ever truly justified, and I'll expand on that in another video, as I think it's part of what's actually hurting the games industry right now. But from what I can see, it doesn't look as though the woke mentality of the Saints Row reboot was the direct reason the studio was shut down. Another detail of this that doesn't bode well for Andy's argument is that a seemingly large amount, though we don't have a head count, of Volition employees banded together to open their own game development studio. This new studio is called Shapeshifter Games. They describe themselves as a AAA open world developer, and there are rumors flying around that they will be working with Xbox Game Studios as a publisher. This employee comeback story doesn't seem to fit in with the narrative that, quote, 80% of the workforce was normal hetero dudes, while a small loud minority of LGBTQ employees were promoted to key roles and then made threats to get their way. There's just nothing I've been able to find that supports this theory. The Saints Row reboot just happened to be a lackluster game, with mixed reviews at worst. Like plenty of other games that we've seen that don't have mysterious inside sources blaming a specific group of people for their downfall. And even with this game being truly pretty bland, nothing else seems to indicate that it was so bad that single-handedly got the studio shut down. Lots of studios make good games these days, even great games, and still lose their jobs if the parent company needs a few dollars to be green in the following fiscal quarter. It just makes this whole woke argument seem pretty weak in the long run. The next pivot the video makes is to explain how these non-cisgendered game developers hate gamers. And to Andy, all gamers are males who want manly games. So before we can discuss his proof of this, we have to look at why this projection on who gamers are is flawed. The gaming industry now makes more money than all blockbuster movies and music releases combined. This effectively means that nearly the entire world buys and plays video games. Sorry to break it to you, Andy, but that's naturally gonna include a lot of women and gay people, and generally anyone else you don't happen to like. And the proof that is provided that shows that all developers are gay and hate the manly majority is a random Reddit post.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
It's Reddit. This user is anonymous, meaning there is no way to know that this individual is either gay or a game developer. And extrapolating this one anonymous post to the entire gaming industry is the definition of the word reach. And it's so comedically pointed what Andy is trying to do with the narrative here. He reads the post in this high-pitched voice with a stock image of a man wearing short pink clothing on screen. He's manufacturing the appearance of this straw man version of what he wants the woke game developer to look like. He wants this image in his audience's head as he reads this, and it's all done entirely within his edit, not with any proof of any game developer that to ever exist. But this post does touch on something that goes completely over Andy's head. And to talk about it, we have to discuss what masculinity is. Masculinity and how it impacts the individual and our society is all very complex. I'm only going to scratch the surface because there's a lot to it, and we're trying to keep the discussion about video games. And it can get even more complicated as you try defining masculinity like in the modern day as opposed to what it used to be, because it's always kind of changing. The basic definition of masculinity is, quote, qualities or attributes regarded as characteristics of men or boys, end quote. And these attributes and characteristics are often prescribed socially to men and boys, meaning they're subject to change over time as society inevitably changes. At one point in Andy's video, he says that by definition, the least manly thing a man can do is wear women's clothes. Well, who says a particular piece of clothing is feminine or masculine? That seems pretty arbitrary. I mean, for a long time, shorts above the knee were seen as strictly feminine, at least in my personal experience. But now males wearing shorter shorts is much more common and not questioned as feminine. I mean, look at the clothes men were wearing in the 80s. Trust me, back then, nobody was calling Steven Tyler gay. But nowadays, his clothing choices look a decent amount like the examples Andy puts on screen as he's calling somebody gay. And this only describes the aesthetics of masculinity. Because then there's the question of what actions are manly. The only types of masculine actions Andy talks about are the really traditional ones, like partaking in war and combat. He talks about groups of men in these situations forming the bonds of brotherhood. And these are really the only manly actions that he discusses throughout the video. It can't help but make you think, like, are these the only ways that men can express their masculinity? And in this narrow conversation about what Andy perceives as manly in video games, it opens a serious question of what then he must think the role of a woman's character must be in gaming. Well, at one point, he casually uses the phrase arm candy in reference to women characters in video games,
with the sexy and smart Anya as his arm candy and wife.
And this could be really telling as to the way Andy must view the roles of masculinity and femininity if it were up to him. It seems that to him, men are leaders, warriors, and doers. They must act and look a certain way in order not to be ridiculed and removed of their manly worth. And women then are to be emotional, obedient, and to look a certain sexualized way in order to be deemed worthy of male attention. And I know this sounds scathing. I'm not posing this as a personal attack against the guy or his followers, but what else am I supposed to think when the entire argument is that if a company allows the fat liberal white women that he obviously has contempt for to be promoted or even hired into a gaming company, it automatically means that the destruction of the company is soon to come due to their incompetence.
Game developers need to stop putting gay stuff in games, and they need to fire every liberal white woman if they want us to ever buy a game again. Because I'm serious, we are done with this shit. We're not buying these games.
There isn't anything else to gather from this video other than the fact that he looks to gatekeep the video game industry and forcibly make it into a male-only industry. Anything he happens to perceive as feminine is inherently lesser than, and it makes him angry. He wishes that game studios exclusively focused on creating games that cater to him. And the only logical next step is to assume he feels women should be subservient to men. And that's a huge problem. And it's not manly. I know people hate the branding of this term and how it's named, but this is a good representation of toxic masculinity, which is what the original Reddit post from earlier was talking about being tired of seeing come up in gaming Twitch chats. So we've done it. We've now reached the point in the video where I'm going to talk about what has really happened to masculinity in video games now that we have the context of Andy's narrow worldview in our heads. And it does begin with a discussion on toxic masculinity. So toxic masculinity does not mean that all things masculine are toxic. The term is used when specific attributes that people prescribe as masculine are inherently toxic. An example would be if somebody feels that instantly resorting to physical violence is more manly, thus better than other options of dealing with problems. That violent behavior and its link to masculinity is toxic. Or it can be when somebody's perception of masculinity is just taken too far. Like when there's an assumption that masculinity automatically implies that women and their feminine traits are worth less to a society than the masculine traits. That's also toxic. One of the changes we've seen from all media and video games is the awareness of the ways that masculinity can become or is toxic. The realization within our society has created an environment where we get some of the best examples of masculinity ever created, particularly within gaming. Masculinity has not been removed from our modern video games. It's just been more accurately represented. And what's funny here is that Andy brought up a game that's pretty pivotal to this change. Andy brings up Red Dead Redemption 2 at the opening of his video. And he describes Arthur Morgan as a manly character. Unfortunately, he says this solely because he believes the studio is entirely made of men. So, of course, these men made a great manly protagonist. But no, Arthur Morgan is manly because of his redemption. I mean, it's literally the title of the game. Throughout the story, Arthur makes a gradual change into a better man. An example of this is when he originally pigeonholes Sadie Adler into the traditional woman's role and nearly forces her to stay in it, which is pretty toxic.
I ain't chopping vegetables for a living.
Oh, I'm sorry, madam. Was there insufficient feathers in your pillow?
I ain't lazy, Mr. Morgan. I'll work, but not this.
Well, ain't cooking what?
But he eventually softens and learns that she's just as capable as any other outlaw.
I enjoyed myself out there.
Yes, Mrs. Adler did okay.
That shopping?
Yes, that's shopping.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan.
Don't mention it. I would ride with you again, Mrs. Adler, if you will ride with me.
Maybe. If you prove you can handle yourself.
And this is just one small example in a massive video game. But Arthur's complexity and morality arc may be something that couldn't exist if the game had been developed with Andy's version of masculinity in mind. Or at least that version would have been the dishonorable playthrough. But what we learn from Arthur is that being a great man, being manly, comes from the ability to help others, the ability to find worth in all people, no matter their opinions or situations, and the ability to shed off old notions of masculinity when it's needed, learning when to be sensitive and when to be tough. And this level of nuance in masculinity seems to be something Andy and his take doesn't quite understand. Because I feel it's the diversity that Andy seems to despise in the gaming industry that is exactly the reason why such a dynamic and interesting character can exist in the first place. Another example could be looking at Joel from The Last of Us. I mean, we can even talk about Joel's actions just in The Last of Us Part 2, which was released in 2019, a year that Andy asserts can't have masculinity in it whatsoever without the risk of upsetting the woke mob. But guess who was actually upset about that game? But everyone's favorite moment with Joel was when he was doing something sweet with Ellie for her birthday. This whole section I could see easily being described by Andy as feminine and gay, due to how soft Joel is being. But this section is exactly what makes Joel a great man. Another example of Joel being a better man than Andy is when we see that Joel has the ability to adjust and accept and not avoid and shame the fact that Ellie is gay. He even asks her about her dating life.
Dina, is she your girlfriend?
No. No, that was just one kiss. It doesn't mean anything. I don't know why she did that.
But you do like her.
So stupid.
Look, I have no idea what that girl's intentions are, but I do know that she would be lucky to have you.
That's the love he holds for Ellie and how he expresses it is what makes Joel such a great character. And Joel and Arthur both have their struggles in the pursuit of being a good man. They both experience moments of toxicity, but throughout their stories they grow and learn from these mistakes. And this is what makes them compelling. This is why I've been adamant that I'm not attacking Andy as a person here. Because, well, he's just a person. A person who has all the potential in the world to grow and learn from the toxicity that makes him just so angry when he sees other types of people represented in fictional stories. If all game developers held Andy's super narrow view of what is manly and only made games that represented that, then all we would get are games like Duke Nukem Forever. And if you value your intelligence, just stay away from this argument and run in the opposite direction as fast as you can when you're offered it as the culprit of bad video games. And if you want to learn what's really causing the decline of video games and the source of this negative feeling that Andy has caught on to, then click on the video on screen now, because there was no way I was going to fit it into this video. Thanks for watching.